Okay.
Okay. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Yep. Sorry about that. I was trying to finish up the show and hurry up and get off so I can come join y'all.
You're about ready. 2 minutes.
Let's open that up.
All right, who's gonna kick this thing off here? All right.
Bruce, you want to go?
Giannis, you gonna bring us in?
Cliff Walker. It's been so long you've grown a beard. How are you, sir?
I'm just trying to follow your lead, man.
You don't want to do that. That's going in the wrong direction.
All right, let's go.
Oh, hey everybody.
How you doing? Good afternoon.
Everybody's here.
Good evening. Yep.
Giannis, you on?
Okay. Oh, we're ready. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How is everybody doing? I am Giannis Banks, host of the Forum on KZI at 8.7 FM, and we are here to have a community conversation with the brothers, working with the brothers of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, with the voter action stuff that they have been working on. Excuse me. And so, before we get into all the panelists and who is and their stories, I guess I'll give everybody a chance to at least introduce themselves, and then we'll go into some of your background. So we will start with we'll start with Brother Bruce Cobbs. Let him go ahead and be the first to introduce himself.
Hey, Giannis, I guess as usual, since we have Bruce Elfan on here, we'll just put me down as Ricky so we won't confuse who's who. As I always do. But I'm Ricky Cobbs. I am retired from Norfolk Southern Railroad, active as the voter active co-chairman of Epsilon Iota chapter of Omega Psi Phi. And what we're trying to do here is put on a program for everyone to educate and to make you aware of all the information that you might need or need to know. Brother Williams?
Awesome.
I'm Larry Williams. I'm past one of the past state reps for Omega Psi Phi in Austin area, Texas. And since '84, I've been working with the Omega Voter Action Project, which is a group of fellows who are working nationwide with voting. And it's all about galvanizing Americans toward civic engagement. We started out working under Reverend Jesse Jackson and some of his people when he first ran for president. So we just decided to keep going. Tonight, we are working with not just the Omegas, but we are looking at all of the Divine Nine, Black Greek fraternities and sororities. We're here in the spirit with all of them, and also doing initiatives that separately and sometimes together that relates to getting our peoples to actually simply go vote, simply just vote, #vote. It's part of the Operation Big Vote coming out of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation.
Awesome. Let's go with We'll start with the electeds. Brother Elfin, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It's good to see y'all.
Good to see you. Yep, just quick introduction of yourself.
Yes, I'm Bruce Alfant. I'm the Travis County tax assessor and voter
more
registrar.
about you. Okay, fantastic. And next we'll go with Dr. Burnett.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Colette Pierce Burnett. I'm fortunate and blessed to serve as the president and chief executive officer
We'll kick it with you.
of Houston-Tillotson University. Happy to be here. We've been working with the Omegas probably about 4 years now on voter awareness. So I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Burnett is a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. That's my mama. That's my mama's sorority. That's out of sight, red and white.
Delta Diva.
And Brother Cliff Walker, we'll start with you, sir.
Thank you, Giannis. My name is Cliff Walker. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Texas Democratic Party. My background is in what I affectionately call a political hack in my day job. For the last 15 or so years, I've recruited and helped hundreds of candidates, all in the state of Texas and from San Antonio. But for the last 5 years, I've had the pleasure of working with the Texas Democratic Party. And now I help lead a team of 150 operatives scattered across the state and country, and focused on our number one goal of making sure that Texas is not just the biggest battleground state in the country, but that we really make a miracle happen in 34 days.
Awesome. And then we'll get with Brother Joseph. But you're on mute, though.
Yeah, that always happens. I'm Peniel Joseph, and I'm the Barbara Jordan Chair in Political Values and Ethics at the LVJ School of Public Affairs. And I'm a professor of history there, and I run the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, which promotes research based at the intersection of race, democracy, and vulnerability in public policy.
Okay, I think that was everybody. Fantastic. And now, so I think so people can get a little bit more familiar with you, where I'm sure, you know, most of y'all people are very familiar with. Of course, Dr. Burnett, with the work you've been doing at Houston-Tillotson, you are a celebrity in the city. And folks are very familiar with you. And of course, Brother Elfant, with all the work you've been doing to get the vote out here in Travis County, from back when you was a constable to now as a tax assessor and collector. You know, y'all are two legends in this city. And so we want folks, though, who may not be as familiar with you to know a little bit about you. And so, you know, starting with whoever wants to go first, I'd love to hear about, you know, why voting for you is personal. What about voting is so personal to you, and why do you feel it's important?
Well, Giannis, I'll be your guinea pig since we started off. The reason I take voting so personal is when I was somewhere in between the 2nd and 3rd grade, my mom took me to Woodrum Airport in Roanoke, Virginia, to see Vice President Lyndon Johnson. And I so far back, I can't remember why he came there, but he got off his plane. And when he got off his plane, he walked right over to me and shook my hand. And, you know, back during that time, he was known as a Dixiecrat. But after President Kennedy got assassinated, he was the president that led us and got the 1964 Civil Rights Bill passed and the 1965 Voter Rights Act plan, which, you know, today we wouldn't be where we were without it. So I guess I sort of got indoctrinated earlier. And my parents, even at a young age, explained to me the importance of voting. And we would see what was going on the television screen, how they were trying to suppress the vote and how people were being abused and locked up to keep them from voting. And so with that in mind, I've always been active in politics or discussions, trying to discuss with younger people, you know, just their ideas and why they had their values, and try to help them to understand why it's important to vote.
Awesome. And I'll let whoever wants to be next go next, or I will start picking people, however y'all feel most comfortable. But for you, why is voting personal to you? And like Brother Cobbs did, maybe even a little voter history story. Tell me why voting, is important to you, to help people understand why, even if I don't feel or like one of the candidates, what's the importance of going out to vote?
I'll share, Giannis. The first presidential election for me was Carter in 1976. And I think as I've grown older over time, I've become more and more acutely aware of how powerful the vote is. Things that we take for granted, Bruce was saying this earlier, things we take for granted in our everyday lives are impacted by legislation and by who we vote for. So through Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all the way through last night, I see how important it is to vote. And no vote is a vote. And I was raised in the 60s, probably like most of us, not all, but most of us, some of us on the call. And during that time, the Higher Education Act, which is the Pell Grant, and majority of my students use the Pell Grant, the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Affordable Care Act, the Once American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, which really brought the country back. All of that comes from voting. And I think many of us, we don't recognize how intense that is until you start getting older. So I've taken it on as a personal mantra to really push voting for young people so that they can see early on the power and the value of their vote, every vote, and the importance of being an informed voter, not just a voter. Because I think I spent my early years just voting in the presidential election without really being aware of the ballot itself and the power of the entire vote.
Awesome. Who wants to be next? We'll go with Cliff. Look like you're reaching, so I'm gonna go with Cliff Walker.
I felt it coming, Giannis.
I saw your arm move. You raised your hand.
Well, pardon me. When I was younger, I was kind of a brat of a kid, and I remember being very argumentative. I think in another universe, I probably decided to go practice law and slamming books down in a courtroom somewhere. But I remember watching too much C-SPAN at the age of 15 or whatever. Yeah, no, wow. I was the coolest kid in school for sure. And then arguing with my mom about various policies that I had no idea what I was talking about. So I remember when, I went to vote in the first presidential election, and my first was 2000. And I was one of those folks who said, you know what, I need to push the system. I'm outside the system. And I proudly cast a vote third party. And for Mr. Nader. That was my first vote. I don't know if I've ever confessed that I'm making news on your show, to be honest. I never confessed.
Are you going to have a job tomorrow? Hold on.
We shall see. We shall see. So I remember after the fact just watching all the tumult, right? 537 votes in Florida after 36 days of counts. And, since then, I've thought back to that. As every cycle that I do this work, I come across another election that we win or lose by 10 votes, sometimes by 4 votes. Donna Howard in 2006, I think was at 2010 was at 4 votes. I want to say in 2008 in the state house, we had a chance to pick up a state house seat in Dallas, and we lost that seat by 19 votes. If we would have won it, we would have gotten to 75 Dems and Republicans in the state house. We probably would have elected a Democratic speaker. There's a lot of stuff that could have happened, including some progress on healthcare. So, I think back to that first vote and how I thought, well, it didn't matter so much. And now I think, well, there's climate change. And if we had a different president, we would have taken a different approach in 2000. on the Iraq War, and we're still feeling the repercussions of the Iraq War from 2000, we would have had a different approach to that. And I now think of every single election as quite possibly hinging on one vote. I've seen too many, every single 6 months where there's a local election in the state of Texas, there's one election that takes place, at least at the city council, school board level, that's settled by a handful of votes.
Yeah.
And that could be the deciding vote on everything that we care about.
I feel like it used to be a story back in the day I knew of a candidate who was too busy to vote for himself on election day or even doing early voting, and he lost by one vote. And he was the reason why he basically lost the election, because he was too busy to go vote even for himself. So your story, I mean, it resonates. I hope folks understand how important that is. We'll go with Brother Joseph, and then we'll get to Brother Elfant as we begin to transition to a different segue.
Yeah, I think my first election, Colette was saying about
was it 60s?
No, my first election was Bill Clinton. And so, I'm a native New Yorker, proud son of Haitian immigrants, and we've always voted in the House. And my mom was a trade unionist, so I was on my first picket line when I was in elementary school. So we knew about local elections, we knew about city council. I grew up around those people in New York City, connected to the Black church, but we're also local assemblymen. Floyd Flake was in Queens, so we were connected here. But I had an opportunity to do volunteer work for David Dinkins before I could even vote. So David Dinkins was elected the first Black mayor of New York City in 1989 and took office in 1990. And I think the excitement of that, and this is obviously 4 years before Giuliani and the city took another turn, and it was before Yusef Hawkins. It's very, very exciting to be connected to that. And I think that really showed me the power of the vote. Dinkins really galvanized the city. New York City had never had a Black mayor before, hasn't had one since either. And these were really tough times. And it was so hard to defeat Mayor Koch. We were trying to get rid of Ed Koch, who had been mayor for 12 years, who had been a disappointment to many Black people, at least. So with the vote, I think I've always been connected to the vote more, even at the local level than the federal level, because of growing up in New York City during the Koch and Reagan era. And Eleanor Bumpus was killed. Michael Griffith was murdered, Howard Beach by white supremacists. So this is all in high school. And you saw the vote and the change with David Dinkins, or at least the effort to change with David Dinkins. And that's what makes the vote so important to me.
Awesome. Brother Elfant, we'll get with you in your personal story about voting. We know the yeoman's work you've been doing here in Travis County as the tax assessor collector and getting the voter registration numbers up. Of course, that's been help of all the deputy voter registrars and people helping you, but we know you've been driving that. But why is voting so important and personal to you?
Well, thanks for having me, and it's great to be with a bunch of rock star activists. This is so cool. I went to a Ralph Yarbrough rally with my parents when I was 10 days old, and the rest is history. Senator Yarbrough, for those of you who remember, was the first Southern senator who voted for civil rights. And he became a hero to me. And I grew up in a civil rights family. And my background, my grandparents were immigrants, and they suffered a lot of discrimination. We were a Jewish family in Houston. We suffered a lot of discrimination. And in Houston, the African-American community and the Jewish community really came together and worked closely on all manner of civil rights issues. And I'm so proud that my parents were actually at the Lincoln Memorial. And, I was 4 years old. I didn't care much then. And now I'm like, why didn't you bring me? I wish to God I could have been there. So I've been, a civil rights and a progressive activist all my life. And when I came to UT, I was registering voters back in 1976. My first vote was Jimmy Carter. I'm still proud of that. I didn't know that 40 something years later, I was going to be Travis County's voter registrar. And so it was pretty amazing. But, you know, I was doing registration then and I am now. Very briefly, the United States is 100th in the world in voter turnout, and Texas is 47th, 48th among the states in voter turnout. And that's pathetic for a nation that declares ourselves as the indispensable nation. That is just so pathetic. The good news is that Travis County has a very high turnout among the counties in Texas, and we have the highest voter registration rate of any urban county in Texas. And we're trying to plant some voter registration bluebonnets around the state. So maybe Texas will actually become a voting state one day. So I'll stop there, and it's good to be here.
Yeah. I always joke that, you know, Texas is always proud to be at the top of the list. And so we just kind of inverted, you know, and flip that over. We're top 5 in low voter turnout. You know, we're number 2, number 3. We're doing good like we like to do in Texas. Apparently, that's where we want to be, is in, you know, that honorable distinction or dishonorable distinction.
All I'm gonna say is we're behind Oklahoma, and that's not a place we want to be.
Are you trying to start things here in Austin? Okay. That's fine, but we're going to get into some voter information for this part of the conversation. And so Bruce is going to be dealing a lot with you, and anybody else who wants to chime in, you're more than welcome to. I feel like, Cliff, you may have something to chime in on this as we're talking about how to vote and things. And we know y'all have the lawsuit going on currently with you know, was it 2 sessions ago, I believe? Oh God, I've gotten old. 2017 is when they got rid of the straight ticket, one punch voting. And y'all have the lawsuit that you just won in district court, allowing that. And of course, that's going to be challenged and how that can go. But here we are. And I know Bruce will be able to weigh in on this as well, because I think as we're coming up to early voting on October 13th, you know, it's something that people are going to need to know with how they're going to be able to vote, right? And so with that being said, when it comes to voting, you know, in local elections, Bruce, how does that work? Or, you know, what do people need to do when they want to vote in local elections, information they need, and we can get into Texas and even nationally as well?
Sure. Well, the first thing they need to do is make sure that they're registered to vote and at their current address. And we have 6 days left to do that. Monday, October 5th is the deadline, and the tax office and all our locations will be open till midnight to register voters. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, as you kind of alluded to, everything up and down the ballot's important. I mean, the presidential obviously is taking all the attention, but your city council members and your legislators, and I'd like to think your tax assessor and your school board members, they're going to have more impact on your lives, your everyday lives, than the top of the ballot. And it's so important to get all the way down the ballot. And one way you can do that is to go to the League of Women Voters website, or you can go to votetravis.com, and there's a link to it. And they have a voter's guide, and you can see all the information about all the candidates and all the propositions on the ballot. And if you go to votetravis.com, you can see where your polling places are. And you can see a wait time map. And so you can actually see how long the wait times are at the polling places during early voting and on election day. And so early voting starts October 13th. And for those who may be voting by mail, the mail ballot should mostly be mailed out now, and they can actually start being delivered in person tomorrow, October 1st. Either at the tax office, we have a lane for the mail ballots, and there's 2 parking garages downtown at 11th and Lavaca and 9th and Guadalupe, where you can turn in your mail ballot in person. So early voting goes through the 13th of October through the 30th of October. And obviously election day is Tuesday, November 3rd.
Awesome. And yeah, let's talk about the voting guide. You mentioned the League of Women Voters. You know, for folks who may not be familiar with the work that they do or that guide, you mentioned it was up on the screen. How, I guess, balanced and fair is that voting guide? If somebody was saying, you know, I want independent information, I don't want to be slanted one way or the other.
It's about the most objective information out there. The League of Women Voters are nonpartisan. I know from personal experience, my wife was on their committee, and she wasn't allowed to be on there the year that I was on the ballot. And they don't allow anybody who has any connection with the political parties or candidates. And so they try to be as objective as possible. And basically what they're doing is taking information from the candidates. They ask several questions and the candidates have 200 or 400 words to respond. And so it's about as objective as you can get. And, you know, you probably know what you're going to do for president. Do you know what you're going to do for the Third Court of Appeals and what the issues are there? Or the county treasurer. Assessor. Or the tax assessor. Well, I hope everybody knows that. But and so it's a great guide. And then we have propositions on the ballot, and it'll give the pros and cons of the propositions.
Awesome. Now, for those who go and try to vote, and we can bring Cliff into this too, because it'll tie in. I'm sure I can make it tie in. But when you're going to do you want to go vote, and a poll worker is trying to limit your vote by saying, okay, I can't find you. Here's a provisional ballot, or your spelling is wrong in your name, or it's not matching, and they want to give you a provisional ballot. What, I guess, suggestion do you give to people to help navigate that? Because we know the issues that can happen when you vote provisionally. A lot of people don't know that you may have to come back to fix it if you do vote provisionally. And if you don't come back, how your vote can be discarded because of that and what have you. And so what do you have to say for folks who, if they find a poll worker that's trying to force them to do a provisional ballot when they're pretty sure they're on the voting rolls?
Do you want to take that, Bruce, or shall I jump in?
Oh, go ahead, and I'll follow up. I'll do cleanup.
Oh, thank you. So the goal, obviously, when you go to vote, is to make sure that the vote is counted. And if you have any questions about what you need to bring to the polls, you know, Bruce mentioned a resource. We maintain a resource as well, mytexasvotes.com. There's a list of all the various IDs that you can bring to the polls that will allow you to vote. If you encounter someone who tells you that for whatever reason they can't find you in the rolls, or you're unable to cast anything but a provisional ballot, there are a variety of reasons why they may say that, but what we do recommend, what our folks recommend, is that you do reach out to us. We will have lawyers on call and plenty of volunteers, hundreds of volunteers who are manning the phone lines of 1-844-TX votes, which is our voter assistance hotline that we maintain as the party. My Texas Votes is another place. MyTexasVotes.com. You can go online to flag if there's an issue that you've encountered at the polls. It is helpful to let us know when those issues are occurring, because then we can identify whether there's something that's systematically happening to other voters as well. But that would be our recommendation, to make sure that when you go back into that polling place, that you can cast a non-provisional ballot that we can be very confident is going to be counted.
Okay.
Almost under any circumstances, the election workers have to allow you to cast a provisional ballot. You don't have your ID, there's something else going on, they have to let you cast a provisional ballot, and then you have time to cure that ballot. If you don't have the right ID, you can come into the tax office and cure the ballot with the right ID. If there's other issues, you have some time to cure it, but they have to let you cast that provisional ballot and give you the opportunity to cure it anyway. But not everybody gets it cured, but at least there's a chance to be able to do that. Cliff talked about the IDs, and if you go to votetravis.com, there's a voter ID section as well. The good news on voter ID is that the original voter ID law was the driver's license and a few other things, and the federal courts came along and decided that that was too restrictive, which is what we told them. And now, if you don't have one of the 6 original forms of ID, you can vote with a birth certificate or any government document with your current name and address on it, a utility bill, a bank statement, or amazingly, you can actually vote with your voter registration card. I mean, who would have thunk? And so there are a lot of options to be able to vote with. The challenge is that very few people understand that. They remember the coverage of the voter ID law years ago, and they thought, well, if I don't have a driver's license, what's the point? So our challenge is to educate the community and let people know who may have challenges with ID, that the number of IDs that they can actually vote with is more expansive than it used to be.
And as of right, go ahead.
Just very briefly to that point, Bruce, as the resident partisan, I will say this: I think that's so much of the intent of these laws, which are just classic voter suppression laws that have been passed by the folks in charge, and generally across the board in Texas, that's been Republicans. When it comes to voter ID, you're absolutely right. Most people are able to provide some version of ID. There are certainly folks who cannot or have a very difficult time doing that. And disproportionately, those are people of color, younger voters, and voters who are working folks or who are poor. But the intent of the law is not simply to disenfranchise those folks who may not have access to ID, but also to provide this narrative that it's actually difficult to vote. And there was a really interesting study after 2016 that showed that voter ID laws probably disenfranchised enough people to swing a congressional election where Democrats ended up losing. And it wasn't because those people didn't have access to ID, but because the perception that they had was that they might have a difficult time voting.
Whoops, Bruce, you need to unmute.
Bruce, you're muted.
Your lips are moving, but we don't hear anything.
Okay, now, look, I didn't know I was muted. Look, let me ask you about Senate Bill 5 so people can understand about if someone has an expired voter ID, like I guess an expired driver's license, is there something about the age limit that you can have, the length of time you can have an expired license? I don't think a lot of people know about that. And what do they need to bring with them when they come to turn in they drop off their mail-in ballots when they show up?
For registration and voting purposes, you can have an expired ID up to 4 years if you're under 70. And if you're over 70, it can be expired for, you could bring your first driver's license with you if you're over 70 and actually vote with that or register with it. For the turning in your mail ballots, you'll need to show a photo ID. And it's pretty simple. You show a photo ID, you sign a roster, you give over the ballot, and you move on. And so it's about a 30-second operation. And Dana's done a really good job of setting these up. And I know there'll be long lines, but they will move fast. And people will have the peace of mind that the elections office actually has it and it's not stuck in the mail somewhere.
Is there a way, if they're, because I understand people make mistakes, they forget to sign something. Say if their mail-in ballot gets rejected, how can they find out whether it's rejected or not? And can they fill out a new one if it's rejected?
I'm not an expert on this. Cliff may know more about the election side of this than I do. I know that everybody whose ballots are rejected gets a letter. I don't know the timing of it, and I don't know the due process part of that. Do you have more on that, Cliff?
I don't know off the top of my head, but if there is a question that a voter has, and I know that many people are asking very similar questions as they explore voting by mail for the first time, given the pandemic, it is my job to encourage them to call the experts at our hotline 1-844-TX-VOTES.
Yep. Sorry about that. I don't know. I guess I just dropped off for some weird reason. I'm showing all my bars and I dropped off. I'm not sure what questions were asked, but it's all good. Before we get on to the next segment, I do want to have Cliff and even Bruce chime in if it wasn't asked about clearing up about straight ticket one punch voting for those who may want to do that, because depending on where you live here in Texas, your ballot can be very long. And some people want to be able just to come and punch one way and be done with it. It was taken away. Supposedly it's back now. What is the advice that I guess Cliff, you would give them, as well as Bruce? What advice would you give people for that?
Sure. So a little bit of background. For years and years, for decades, Texas had one punch voting, where you go in, you press one button, you vote for the entirety of one party. In 2017, on a party line vote, but the Republicans passed an end to straight ticket voting. Now they thought that they had one more good cycle of straight ticket voting, so they delayed the onset of the bill taking effect until the 2020 cycle. So rather than having it take place in 2018, that it take place in 2020. And the reason this is done is twofold. One, Democrats had achieved parity with straight ticket voting in a lot of our urban counties, and largely going across the state. And the trends were very clear that there was going to be an advantage for Democrats in cycles to come. But secondarily, you're absolutely right. In some of our larger urban counties where a lot of Democrats live, Harris County, which is quite blue, Travis County, Dallas County, all very blue counties. Those are all large counties that have a lot of elected officials. So when you include all of our constables, our justices of the peace, our district court judges, and a variety of other ballot measures, you may be looking at ballots that are upwards of 80 to 100 individual measures that you need to vote on. So part of the impact of eliminating straight ticket voting is to take a 3 to 5 minute voting experience and to make it a little bit longer. So in some of our counties where we have great election administrators who manage these elections well, it does make the issue of lines a bit more of a challenge. So where we are in terms of suing is we joined the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee as the Texas Democratic Party, and we sued. And you're absolutely right. We had some success at the district court level. That was fairly quickly stayed at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the fight continues. And the fight doesn't simply continue for 2020, it continues indefinitely. One thing that we learned over the course of this lawsuit is that straight ticket voting is actually the preferred method for a lot of people of color, particularly Black folks, in a lot of our core urban areas, right? So what to expect for 2020? I would say this, right? We're going to keep up the fight on straight ticket voting and on a raft of other voter suppression issues that have passed as the state has grown more competitive, because that is the approach of one side of the aisle in order to maintain power. So we're going to keep fighting on that front and others. I would say for the 2020 election cycle, it's wise to be prepared to need to go vote for the entirety of the ballot. And what we are doing to prepare folks for that is communicating that. We hear a lot of different slogans in a lot of different communities. In some communities, it's just vote up and down the ballot, vote all the way through, but vote blue all the way through. There's a lot of slogans that are propping up, but you're seeing a lot of messaging behind that to let people know, a lot of investment in messaging to let people know that voting may be a little bit of a different experience this time. You have to individually mark everyone. What we also encourage people to do is to vote early. So for those folks who do choose to vote by mail, in previous election cycles, as the party, we mail out hundreds of thousands of applications to apply to vote by mail. And typically for us, we mail out a bunch in the primary, and we check the box that says that that voter, when they submit that application, will get a ballot for every election up this year. And then we also send a supplemental mailing in the fall in preparation for the general election. Usually that goes out in mid-September.
Good deal.
In
Appreciate
2020,
that. Oh, yeah, I have to cut you off there because we got to get on to the next section, but that was definitely good information. No, you did good. I need to jump to Brother Cobbs.
Well, I'm going to also include Cliff with me because he and I talked before, but the first thing I want to get out is some of the information I was going to tell that Cliff and Bruce have already named about where you can go to find out where you vote. And where you find out where your polls are, like you go to votetravis.com, it gives you a list of all your polling stations, where you can go, what times they're open, and you can register to vote. You can go to wilco, WILCO.org, and we're putting that up on the screen now, /elections, so you can find out where all your polling locations, where you can go in Texas. One important thing I want to get out there, in the terms of voter suppression, and Cliff and I hit him with this later. If you encounter any form of voter suppression, like from the Proud Boys or from what our illustrious leader was talking about, people I saw in Virginia where there were some people out there shouting slogans, and you might encounter something. But if you encounter it, please dial the voter suppression line that they have is 1-866-687 8683. That's if you encounter any form of voter suppression. Then one thing I like to tout, I know we might have people from other states listening in, and we mentioned the League of Women Voters putting out vote411.org. You can put that in for your state, and you can find out where your polling places is, what's on the ballot. I know I looked on what's on the ballot for my district in Austin, and I didn't, state of Texas, you vote on your Supreme Court justices, unlike some states. And we have Supreme Court justices, judges, Travis County Attorney General, Travis County Attorney. So if you want to start with criminal reform, you need to go there and find out what's on the ballot so you can identify criminal reform. You have your school boards on there this year. You have two congressmen, a senator, and a presidential election on there. So don't just stop at the presidential election. Do your whole ballot, whether you have straight ticket or not, to make sure you cover everything. Because if the only way what criminal reform starts with is with your vote. You need to vote the people in at your location to get the type of results you want. Cliff, did I leave anything out that you think you need to cover on that?
That was very comprehensive.
All right, well, I guess we'll move on to Giannis, and you can bring us all in.
Sure. So let's bring in everybody for this conversation, because we want to talk about effective solutions. And, I want everybody to be a part of this conversation. But we'll start off with Dr. Burnett. How can we defeat voter suppression barriers? I guess, for you, actually, I want to talk about college voting. Let's do that with you, with college voting as the president of HT. What are things that you would like to see your cohorts, your fellow university presidents doing to help get college students out, but even having better access at our college campuses?
I want to, if I could merge those two questions together,
Sure.
Part of my response. I think it's really important for us to understand that voter oppression is real. It's not something that it's not a hoax. And it's something that we need to be very, very conscious of. And one way we do that is by educating ourselves on the origination of our right to vote, especially as Black people. So we encourage our young people to read very thought-provoking books. There's a book out, CASTE, C-A-S-T-E, and it talks about the history of this nation from a caste system perspective. And when you know the history of the nation, and you watch all the way up to watching documentaries about John Lewis's life, if you don't really have this burning desire in your soul to exercise your right to vote, you need to do a little more history. So when we know our history and we understand what happened for us to be able to even have the right or the quote unquote privilege to vote, then I think it drives us and it gives us a bigger sense of urgency. So that segues me to young people. We need to move aside and let young people find their form of activism to encourage them to vote. When I tell my students you need to vote, I'm like their parents, saying you need to vote. And I think many of the stories that we got with that were, Bruce told a great story about being 4 and not really understanding what's going on. So we don't really, our parents, they don't seem like people we should be listening to all the time until they're older and you're older. But in the interim, when you let young people run voting campaigns, they listen to their peers. So we were very, very fortunate on Houston-Tillison's campus because the students originated bringing back the NAACP student chapter, 69AA. And I've said this before, when the president knows the chapter name, it's an active chapter. And for them, voting is their #1 priority. So they lit the fire on campus in a way that the administration had been trying to do that for a while. So partnerships are very important. Like I was saying, our partnership with Omega Psi Phi fraternity, we partnered with the Links, we partnered with the League of Women Voters to use their resources. You go fast alone, but you go farther together. So when a college campus partners with these organizations to get the word out, in addition to young people voicing it, then it does put that fire in your belly to want to affect change. So we marched together to vote. The students and I did with several faculty and staff for the 2016 election. So it was very hard to keep my students motivated that next day about encouraging them to vote. And that's when it came to me that we have to show them that there's more than the presidency vote. When you have challenges with the civil and criminal justice system, who's the prosecuting attorney? Who are the elected judges? Who are you voting for that appoints the judges? When you have a problem with transportation in Austin, know what the propositions are and do your homework. Don't let someone else tell you how you should vote. I mean, our goal is not to tell them what to think and who to vote for. Our goal is to expose them to all the issues at hand so that they can make a critical decision for themselves, for what they are interested in, not to push them one way or the other, but to hope that they're going to follow their own moral compass to be able to vote for who they want or what they want to vote for. So it's keeping young people engaged in the movement to encourage people to vote. It's knowing your history all the way back to the 1600s on how we got to this space where voter oppression happens around us and we don't even know, all the way to keeping the fire in the belly and being an informed voter. So you're not just voting, down the ticket is good if that's what you choose, but you may find yourself not voting in a direction or for someone who you aren't supporting. So we want students to be really individual, and students they're smarter at getting each other out to do things. So
technology definitely helps with that.
No, definitely. We had even though we're fully online, that chapter, the NAACP chapter 69AA is doing, working with our student affairs professionals, and we're doing a massive campaign about voting. So they use that social media, that technology in ways to reach that we could not. So I'm very pleased with that.
Brother Joseph, I want to bring you in as well. And she gave a great answer. Dr. Renee gave a great answer about how we can defeat voter suppression and barriers. I want to toss that to you, but also about how criminal background and prisoner voting, how that can impact, what solutions we can have for that, because there are those who either are uninformed about, how they can vote based on their background or whether they can vote based on their background. And there's even ways, depending on your crime, if you're in prison at the time, you can be, you're able to vote as well.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll send Larry a website that our fellows created called it's a voter rights project, which is an exploration of voting rights in Travis County, and it gives what the stakes are: historical voter suppression, modern voter suppression. It gives people information on how to vote and all these different things. And they worked with Notley this summer building that website. So no, we do a lot. I mean, we've brought Ari Berman, who's got the great book, Give Us the Ballot.
Mm-hmm.
He did a couple of keynote lectures for us. We've worked with the League of Women Voters as well to encourage voting rights on campus. We've done a whole lot of public events, and we have voting rights research projects that connect with the history of voting rights just in Travis County in Texas, as well as nationally, because of course, Texas has the famous Smith versus Allwright case, the white primary here. So we've got a huge history with voting rights and sort of voting, voter suppression. I think one of the things that I do as a professor is connect voting rights to anti-racism and voting rights to social justice and racial justice activism. And really by getting down to the granular details about voting and connecting voting rights to power, connecting it to the distribution of financial resources, economic resources, certainly the criminal justice system, and the fact that the criminal justice system and the Black Lives Matter movement has argued this, of course, is a panoramic gateway to multiple systems of oppression that connect to social welfare, that connect to incarceration, that connect to housing affordability, racial segregation in public schools and neighborhoods, employment, and just other systems that are connected to citizenship and dignity. Of course, a good candidate gets people excited. I think in 2018, people were excited about Beto O'Rourke here. We saw a sort of record turnout for a midterm around the country. I think COVID is going to impact voting, but we've been discussing, and we have a webinar coming up tomorrow about gentrification, but we're going to talk about voting as well. just having a plan to vote early, right? Having a plan to vote, making sure that you can get on a website like the League of Women Voters that is a nonpartisan website that gives you all the information. And also they have that 411, because I've already filled mine out, where you put in your address and you can see, I think in Travis County, we have 38 people on the ballot. Some of them are no contest. Some of them are, I already, Bruce, my favorite tax assessor. I've already clicked in my spot, my intentions for October 13th, Bruce. So your seat is safe for 2020. There's another,
I got one vote.
So that's what we've tried to do. But I do think that we have to understand, and one of the things I'll close by saying this, showing our students, and I think we do this with our undergraduate and graduate students, that voting is just the tip of the spear in terms of citizenship, right? I think those of us who vote regularly are also active citizens. So when you turn voting into the mountaintop of citizenship, that's why it becomes so hard to vote. Now, we know people who are disfranchised and lower income, the data shows us, tend to vote less in the United States. Once you start making $100,000 a year or more, racially, it starts to even out, 200,000 even more. And as we know, age is a factor too. People vote better the older they get in the United States, although young people who've never voted can stay permanent non-voters, the 100 million or so who don't vote, right? So part of it is telling them that citizenship is more than just the vote. And if you feel that way and you get involved, whether you're talking about city council debates or just being part of the Divine Nine, or just any way that you can express yourself, then by the time people say, hey, do you want to vote? Do you want to register to vote? You're much more amenable to that because you've been doing, you're participating in the community. I think the way in which we increase voter turnout is obviously to increase equity, right? The more you feel like a citizen, the more you're going to exercise your right to vote.
Awesome. And with that, I think we're going to be segueing into a break. Or we're going to be taking to do a segue. So I want to bring in Brother Dwayne Clark, who I don't remember if we introduced him or not at the very beginning. If not, we'll give him a chance to introduce himself so folks can know who he is. So, Brother Clark.
Yes, before we get to there, we're just going to put this our information up on screen just for 1 second, and then we will come back to give everybody an opportunity to get this information on where to vote and information on voting, and then we'll come back.
I vote, you vote, we vote, just vote, just vote, just vote, just vote. I vote, you vote, we vote, just vote, just vote.
This here is my voice. This here is my ballot. This here is my vote. This here is my action. Put the vote on the status. Bring it into the madness. You want black power, you grab it. You want black power, you grab it.
I vote, you vote, we vote, just vote, just vote, just vote, just vote, just vote. I vote, you vote, we vote, just vote, just vote.
All right. So thanks everybody for that. And so my name is Dwayne Clark, and I am one of the organizers of this event. And one of the reasons why we wanted to put this together is from a collective of us in the community. We were looking to try to see what is the best thing that we can do to get information out to the public at large. And through that, things came up to be able to spur even a deeper series of conversations in regards to what can we do in our community to move ourselves forward. And through that, we decided to put together a series of conversations. And this is the beginning. One of the most important things that the most important voices that we have is the vote, right? But that's just one portion of it. There's so many other things that we need to empower ourselves in order to build our community. And so this next segment that we'll be kind of going into will kind of delve us into that, right? So the idea here is to spur this dialogue, but not just spur the dialogue, is to engage action. Because at this moment in time, we have talked a lot, we have protested a lot, we've done a lot, and we've asked a lot. But now it's time to stop asking, start participating, and start doing. The only question that should be asked is, what are you doing? What have you done? And what more could you do? So with that being said, our next events that will be coming up is the conversation with David Banner. Some of you may know this individual, some of you may not. Proclaimed hip hop artist that is really one of our strongest voices to our community and to a demographic of people today. And his journey has been, very prolific from where he started to where he is today. But then also moving past David Banner is we're also having a conversation with Killer Mike. Michael Render is his full name, but he goes by his rap name of Killer Mike, which is, somewhat very aggressive. And it probably should be aggressive because right now we are in an aggressive time frame. And I'm gonna say it, we're at war. We are literally at war right now, right? So what are we going to do? No more talking. Let's take this action. So as we're moving forward through this conversation, some of the things in which I want our panelists to help us with is being able to tell our audience, what can we do to move forward past this point to where we are today, right? So with that being said, there are 5 topics that I would like to just briefly touch on. One is, since we talked about voting, we're talking about very pillars, is family, right? What does that play in the Black community and just the community at large? Mental health and wellness, right? It's time for us to change that particular stigma. We're oftentimes afraid to discuss it and talk about it in our communities, but no longer. And then also, we talked about voting, but then also empowerment from a financial perspective, financial empowerment. What is that? And what does that look like for us? Voting is not the silver bullet. It is a bullet. It's a very direct, pointed bullet, but it's not the only thing that can take an enemy down, right? So financial empowerment is another one of those elements that I would like to kind of hear from our panelists and what that looks like for us. And I know we have some very good educators on this call here that I'm pretty sure that most of you all probably have thought through this somewhat. And then lastly, is just to sum all of that up, is just overall, just what do you see from an individual yourselves is what that blueprint is. Everybody talks about the agenda, and I'm gonna use these big air quotes right now, the Black agenda, but I guarantee if I probably asked 10 people couldn't be able to give me what that agenda is. We would all have different perspectives on what that is. So uniformity in trying to come up with what that should look like for us. So again, thank you all for actually participating, in this, and I'm going to turn it back over to Giannis. But one other thing is October 4th, this Sunday coming up, we have a conversation with David Banner. So please go online and register at theconversationtv.com so we can continue this conversation. And then on October 25th, Sunday, October 25th, we'll be with Michael Render and Killer Mike again as we're moving into election day on that Tuesday to see what we're going to do moving forward. So again, thank you all. Appreciate y'all panelists for joining us this afternoon, this evening for this discussion. So let's continue and close this out with a very good conversation. Giannis, back to you.
Yeah, Giannis, I'd like to go because I actually have to go for childcare. So all right. I have to do. We talk about the family, the Black family. I got it. I'm kindergarten. So One, in terms of this Black agenda, we do have it. And I'm going to argue that's the Black Lives Matter movement. A movement for Black lives came out with a policy agenda in 2016. There's different groups that are connected to it, like Legal Defense Fund, Sherilyn Ifill, who's a friend and a mentor, doing great stuff. Here's what we mean. I'm going to give you 10 things. One, reparation. Yes, reparations for racial slavery and also reparations for the abuse of Black folks in the aftermath of the Second World War, not gaining access to the GI Bill or FHA 30-year housing mortgages. You can look at the book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, and then the book From Here to Equality by Sandy Darity, William Darity and his wife and partner, Kristen Mullen, which calls for $12 to $14 trillion in reparations for Black families. 800,000 per Black family would give us 90% of white wealth. So reparations, there's another reparations project by the Black economist, Derek Hamilton, with the Contract for Black America that Ice Cube and him have done. So reparations. Two, ending the bail system, ending the cash bail system in the United States of America that goes back to the convict lease system. So ending that. Three, releasing all prostitutes and sex workers from jail. Black and brown prostitutes and sex workers, trans, have been sexually trafficked, assaulted, at times murdered by police and law enforcement. This has been documented, releasing them from jail. Four, no death penalty, abolish the death penalty. The death penalty is racist. Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy and other scholarship shows us this. Five, free education all the way up to a 4-year college degree for all Americans. That would be a game changer. 6, Medicare for all, not Medicaid, but Medicare. The same kind of good Medicare that my mama, who's 81, has, Medicare for all. 7, reimagine public safety. We've gotten into trouble with this phrase, defund the police. We have to reimagine public safety. That's what people mean. They're saying invest in mental health, invest in housing affordability, invest in food justice, invest in public schools and desegregation, invest in not killing homeless people, but ending homelessness. 8, reimagine the military budget. 53 cents of every $1 of the general tax revenue goes towards the military. We have to reduce our footprint globally in terms of the US military. We have to be upfront about that so we can invest in infrastructure, invest in a universal basic income, invest in Black and brown and poor communities. 9, the redistribution of wealth that Martin Luther King Jr. talked about with the Poor People's Campaign. Dr. King talked about a universal basic income before Andy Yang, before any politicians. Dr. King said that Black people and all people needed guaranteed income, guaranteed employment, guaranteed health care, and he said housing that was fit for human beings. And that's a conversation we need to have again. 10, publicly financed campaigns and a John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. Publicly financed campaign, no more political action committees from the left or the right. Publicly financed campaigns and a John Lewis 50-state Voting Rights Act that covers every single American citizen. 18-year-olds are registered to vote, a national voting rights holiday for voting that has childcare and adult elder care. There's many more, but those are 10. Black Lives Matter has also talked about immigration reform, not just Spanish-speaking immigrants. We have Black and brown immigrants too, right? Who are mistreated from Haiti, where my people are from Central America, from Jamaica, the Caribbean. So we have to talk about that as well. So we do have an agenda, and I would urge everybody, Dwayne, to look at the Contract for Black America by Ice Cube and Derek Hamilton, because that is one version of doing it. They say, look, they are pro-capitalist and they want equity within the capitalist system. BLM has said, no, they have a critique of capitalism. So it's different. So we have many different ways to get this, but the wealth gap, one of the great things about reading the book, and everybody should read From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, is they show how the wealth gap goes back to not getting the 40 acres and a mule, not an income gap, a wealth gap, right? And so until we end that wealth gap, we're not going to have the access that we need and deserve. And those of us in Austin, and I know Dr. Burnett has been doing this for many years now, we're trying to get C-suite companies and venture capitalists and philanthropists to take care of Black folks, both at Houston Tillotson, the Black folks who are Longhorns, Black folks on the East Side, and invest in those communities. We should have already had a big $20 million gift to Houston Tillotson during this time period, the same as we had for other HBCUs who are absolutely deserving of it, but so is HT. We should have had a big gift already for Black students at UT. You know, we have the capital here to be a game-changing city in terms of racial equity and racial justice and economic equity, but we have not been able to extract that capital and that resources. And some of that, most of that is white capital, but we have Black billionaires here too. So we have to admit that. And I'll close with this: the idea of family. So often within the Black community, we've demonized families that don't look like cisgender nuclear families. Yes. And we don't admit that we have the folks who are queer, who are trans, these are our people. Folks who are gay, who are lesbian, these are our sisters, our brothers, our mothers, our cousins. It's not somehow white people or the man did that to us. These are human beings, and this is human rights. So we have these folks who are saying and trying to demonize Black Lives Matter because it's trying to be anti homophobia, trying to say that trans women and queer people matter. We have to understand that's our family as well. So yes, we're going to have, we have families that are straight. We have families that are gay. We have Audre Lorde and Jimmy Baldwin and Bayard Rustin, and we've got Stokely Carmichael and Ella Baker and Angela Davis. So we have to understand that family, we got to get beyond this whole idea of demonizing parts of our own community, because that's parts of us. That's who we are. No one has done that. And being gay and being lesbian and being queer is not an affliction. It's just humanity, right? So we have to embrace all of us, all of us. And those of us who are non-able-bodied, those of us who are struggling with mental, emotional illness, we struggle with it the most, and we are the worst people of admitting that we struggle with. We need mental health and emotional wellness more than anybody on the planet. Okay, we need to take care of ourselves more than anybody on the planet, yet we're the ones fronting saying we don't want to see a therapist. We all need a therapist. We all need a counselor. Black people need it most because of the oppression, not something wrong with us, but because of the oppression. So that's what, when we think about the family, it's not about the Black man and patriarchy. All that stuff sets us back, right? We will be free once we're saying, look, women are leading right now the BLM movement, and that's great, right? So we can serve. We can lead by serving, right? We can lead by serving, and we can also serve by allowing women and other people in our community to lead. So when we think about family, we've got to get beyond patriarchy, beyond this idea that this straight Black man is going to save us, right? Because it hasn't happened in the past for a reason, right? It hasn't happened in the past for a reason. And we are bigger than that. We are more than just straight Black men. And I love straight Black men. I love gay Black men. I love queer people, straight, the whole trans, the whole thing. We are all of that, and we've got to embrace that. The more we embrace that, the stronger our movement will be, and the ability to break free from those bonds. Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we need to follow and live that creed.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Joseph. We got you fired up right there before you got to go pick up the kids. I love it. I love that conversation. You said a lot of good things there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to participate.
Yes, appreciate that. So, Dr. Burnett, let's kind of hear from you. There was a lot of things said from Dr. Joseph. I would like to hear your take on some of that.
Yes, there's not much to add to that. I really want to emphasize that the Black Lives Matter, it's a movement. People should educate themselves about it. You hear people, they in one sentence, they'll say something about Black Lives Matter, making it political or making it violent. And the true movement is not violent. So there's a distinction there. And I think even in the minds of Black people, we don't have that in our souls of that. It is a movement similar to the civil rights movement. It wasn't a civil rights political statement. It was a movement for all people. And the one thing I want to add to what Dr. Joseph was saying was about when we embrace people, as our family, that goes with how we make decisions in our life. So if you're voting as though it's this quote that's floating around on the internet somewhere, but in essence, it says, if you vote as though your land is on fire, you'll pay closer attention to climate change. So if it's not happening to us, we say a couple of days, it's hot in Texas. So it's hotter than normal.
Right.
But our land is not on fire. Or when our parents need medical assistance, Medicare, Medicaid, then you'll make different decisions in your life. And getting engaged in your community, particularly with the school boards. The gap for Black children is growing as opposed to shrinking. And we have to pay attention to that about our young people, specific to young people of color in school, because I'm a staunch believer, not just because I'm, a university president, but education is the great equalizer. The more people are educated, the more apt there are to lean into mental health and well-being, because you understand it. Right. The more educated you are, the better you live in a place where you have an opportunity to live somewhere where your quality of life is better. You can pick better health care. You can pick schools of choice for your children, whatever, however you want to live your life. But you have to be educated in order for you to be a more informed citizen, because citizenry is everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's in our spheres of influence. We don't think we can make change in our own lives, but you can in your everyday life.
Question for you, then. You mentioned something about the school board. So, I mean, as a parent, my children are a lot older now, but for those folks that are listening, I mean, how do you go about getting involved in, because you mentioned that, getting involvement in the school board and things like that. How do you go about that?
You can start by listening to the school board meetings.
Okay.
And because it's, we always have excuses. Right. We're always too tired. The traffic is too much. The people don't like me there. I don't have time. But when something is on fire in our lives, we find time.
Absolutely.
So when we're engaged in the lives of young people, because I believe in my soul that everybody wants their children to have a better quality of life than they did. Every round goes higher and higher. My plateau is my children's platform. My parents' plateau was my platform. So every round goes higher and higher. So when we really get to understand what's happening in the school district by starting by listening to the school board meetings, go meet your child's parent, know your child's principal, know the counselor, because you are your own child's advocate. You can, let your children be children, but get engaged in what's happening in the school district and what's happening in your own neighborhood. Because sometimes we have these fears, these things we build in our mind of what other people have said to us. But when we start peeling the onion back and looking for real, it's a very different scenario, a very different situation, and affects your life differently. Yeah. So things that we don't think of that is happening over there, it's not happening over there. It's not happening to them. This is all happening to all of us. And it's directing the path for all of us, not just in my own, like I can live up in, some suburban area, protected and shielded, but that's not reality of where my children or their children's children are going to be exposed to unless we get engaged and be true advocates for the best for our children, because education is not a privilege, it's a right.
Can I piggyback on something that you said? Even with that, it's something I used to tell people when I would go out and talk to them. But even for those, if you don't have kids, there still is a benefit, as you mentioned, of folks being educated. So even if you don't have kids, but you know of a parent who we know times are hard and they may be working 2 jobs and they can't go to the school board meeting. Now, they may not be able to go to the parent-teacher meeting, but as somebody who don't have kids or doesn't have kids, you could go and sit into the school board meeting or be involved in what's happening at the school and probably be a voice for that parent who is too busy with life. They want to be more engaged, more involved with the school, but they can't do it just because of life circumstances. That's the time.
Right. We all need to be in somebody's village, not just our own.
And let's bring in
Well,
both Bruce's
I
and
would like to
Cliff.
hear from Cliff
Right.
Walker on all this. He's been waiting patiently to speak. Brother Cliff, you know, I guess my main question is very broad. It's some of those topics that we talked about that everybody had talked about, though, is it, you know, how do we go about empowering ourselves to be educated enough to make the right choices for voting, make the right choices in our community? How do we, what does empowerment look like for you?
Well, first, I've been sitting here listening and learning and absorbing from Dr. Burnett and Dr. Joseph, who dropped the mic and then jumped on. I was scared to follow.
Mic drop, boom.
Taking notes. So, you know, for me, and I'm appreciated and moved by this idea that we need to be focused on the bigger movement, that voting is simply just the tip of the spear, the tip of the iceberg, that there's so much more to citizenship, to engagement, to empowerment of our community. I do want to just share two thoughts. One, that in about a month's time, that tip of the spear is pretty darn important. And as much as we have a much broader conversation that needs to be had and will be had over years, there will be many people who run, perhaps some folks who have been on this call, hopefully they consider it. But in about a month's time, we have some very urgent things that we need to fix. You know, Vice President Biden mentioned something last night that just shook me, and I haven't been able to shake it. That 1 out of every 1,000 Black Americans has died from the coronavirus. And by the end of the year, it could be 1 out of every 500. And, you know, Texas is home. And I know there are folks from other states, but Texas is home to more Black Americans than any other state in the country. And when we flex, we can change it all. So the two things that I would encourage folks to think about, it's a little hokey to think of this, but the most impactful thing that anyone can do is talk to somebody that they care about and cares about them, and to just get them to pay a little bit of attention to what's happening, to take one step towards voting, whether that's getting registered, whether that's learning about who the candidates are, the propositions are, whether it's reading Isabel Wilkerson's Cast, as Dr. Burnett suggested, which is a brilliant, beautiful book, and everyone should absolutely read it, or The Color of Law, as Dr. Joseph suggested, or the other books that we talked about. That is all part of the ladder of engagement. And any step on that ladder is best encouraged by somebody in that household. As a campaign, as a party, we're going to text the heck out of you. We're going to call you. You're going to be really annoyed with us by the end of the election. But that's what being in a battleground state is.
Right.
We're going to send a bunch of mail to you. We're going to put ads on TV, on Hulu, on Roku, on YouTube. But the most impactful thing to any voter is someone that they love saying, hey, you ought to pay a little attention to this, by far.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that then, because, you know, and it kind of continues to go back to, you know, education and the youth and things like that. Then how do we get the youth to vote? How do we motivate them to vote and get involved in this process? What is your take on that?
Dr. Burnett has talked about this, I think, very, very wisely, which is the best compeller, the best person who encourages that young person to vote is someone within their peer group. This is scientifically proven, right? We know through years and years of campaigns that I can throw a bunch of mail at you and knock on your door and do all these things, but it is not as effective as someone in the household, someone in my partner, someone in my household, someone in my immediate family or my cousin, or someone in my church, someone at my school, or someone who I see as being a part of my group, as a peer, saying, hey, you ought to look at this. Hey, you ought to consider this candidate. You ought to vote. You ought to volunteer. That is multiple times more effective than just Cliff Walker hack at the party saying you ought to do this thing, right? So to Dr. Burnett's point, elevating those people who are having those conversations is how you get it done. Making sure that they have a platform, whether their organizations are supported, NAACP chapters, college Democrats groups, however they have chosen to organize, if they have the tools and the resources they need to get it done. And then the only other thing that I would add, I kind of hinted at this a little earlier, a little bit in jest, but seriously, you got to run. We got to run. I have, for the last 15 years, primarily focused on recruiting candidates to run for office. And, you know, I've helped recruit statewide candidates all the way down to city council and school board. And the same challenges that we have in terms of engagement with the Black community translates over into running for office. Because unless you have the model, you know, I'm thinking about President Trump, who talked about Neil Gorsuch when he put him in the Supreme Court and said, he's perfect casting. Well, what does that mean? Right, well, he has the look, right?
Right.
And unless we start to see ourselves in those positions and run where we're not supposed to run. You know, Colin Allred, who's a member of Congress in Dallas, ran in a district that had never elected a Black person.
Mm-hmm.
And in Texas, Colin may be the first person since Reconstruction to run and win in a district that wasn't drawn to elect a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
We have state reps, we have city council members who are running, who are getting elected in places that are not necessarily majority Black. And we have to see ourselves as the change agents. I know that being in elective office in the political space is only one part of this whole process, but unless we see ourselves in these positions, then we cannot make change as assertively and as quickly as we want to.
Thank you.
Follow up, and it could be for you or either the Bruces and even Dr. Burnett if she wants to, because I had a caller call into my show before I got on here who was a younger person, but she was talking about how there is the feeling that people try to guilt them to vote by saying, hey, you know, your ancestors, folks before you, they died for this right, they got beat for this right, you need to go and vote. And she talks about how that doesn't necessarily resonate with them, with her, where, you know, if she doesn't want to vote for somebody, she just ain't going to vote for them because she don't like the candidate, their position. There's no beholding to going to vote just because somebody paved the way. What do you say to a younger generation that's feeling like, you know, yeah, there may have been that motivating factor of, look, Bloody Sunday it still isn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, right? It's not that long ago. But for those who are saying like, you're now trying to guilt me to vote and that's not going to work. How do you convince somebody who's saying you need to do more to get me out here than just saying, well, but you know what happened, the history of this and why it's important for Black people to vote in the whole nine?
The way I would respond to that is I'm trying to say two sentences at once. The way I would respond to that is to say, it's really much bigger than you, than I need to vote because my ancestors fought for the right to vote. When you really know the history of just seeing some pictures on a TV screen, as opposed to really knowing these people's lives and what people were confronted with progressively, because we can easily slip back. So that's why if you don't know your history, you will easily, it's happening to our country right now, where people have become complacent and not paying attention to what's happening. So we can easily slip out of being the strongest democracy in the globe by people not knowing how we progress to this place and why we have to keep going from here. It's easy for young people to say, Black, white, brown, all people to say, well, I wasn't here. It doesn't affect me. But then when you understand that it really does affect you in your everyday life, the biases that people have against you, the stereotypes people make against you, your opportunities for jobs, your opportunities for healthcare, all of those rights, we are in a continuous movement to assure that all people have that equity and that freedom in their lives. And we're all susceptible to it if we're blind to it. Indifference is dangerous because you can easily slip in over time back to where we were, as opposed to continuing to progress to dismantle racism in all systems, because we're not in a post-racial society by any means. So, you have to continue to push young people to read and to make decisions for yourself as opposed to what you think people are trying to tell you.
Giannis, I like to break in on one thing about
Go for it.
Is the first thing we have to do is to learn to make decisions based on facts instead of feelings. Now, how do we do that? We have to be willing to discuss the issue with our younger people. I have a 26-year-old daughter. So I'm used to dialoguing with her friends in different age groups. The thing you have to be able to do is you have to listen. You give your thoughts, you listen to their thoughts. You base something on just because I told you so, or just because this is what we did is not going to work. You have to express to them and give them some facts to go on. You have to listen to their facts and feelings too. Then by having a dialogue between the generations, because I remember we were the radical generations when I was coming up. I was a teenager. Well, I was a very young teenager back in '68. I couldn't even go to Woodstock. I wouldn't even drive. I had 2 years to go before I could drive. But the thing to do is that our parents, when I grew up, we didn't have it was a different time, but they always set us down, talk to us, listen to what we had. We have to get involved, build coalitions with other groups and other organizations to spread our knowledge, to spread our decisions, and not cut anybody off because we don't agree with it. I don't need to agree with you. I need to listen to you, and you need to listen to me. And when we do that, we can grow and we can develop a relationship where people want to come to you and ask questions and understand because they don't feel like you're going to shut them off. That's one of the major things.
And Brother Elfin, I want to turn to you. It was said a while ago, and it made me want to ask you this. When we were talking about health and COVID and voting, we saw what was happening during, it seems like it wasn't that long ago, but during the primaries, where people, worried about going to vote in person. Should they vote by mail? We've seen the national conversations going on about, voting by mail, how you have a president who's saying it's corrupt and crooked. You have others who are saying, it's safe, it should be done. You have people here in Texas who seem like they don't want you to do it. When it comes to being, people worrying about voting, but also worrying about their health and their safety, what are things that they can do, even with early voting or voting in person? What kind of advice do you give them about going to vote and making that voice heard if they have fears about, voting in person, but also maybe kind of leery about voting by mail for whatever reason?
Well, the first thing I'd say is if they're eligible to vote by mail, I encourage them to do it. And Cliff can get into a little bit more detail on this, but basically state law says if you're 65, have a disability, which is very, very broad, and the Supreme Court actually said it was broad, or you're going to be out of town for the period, or you're in jail, you can vote by mail. So if you're eligible, I would encourage you to do it for two reasons. One, it's safer this year. The other is that we're going to have record turnouts. We're going to have very long lines. Somebody alluded to the straight party voting earlier. Not having straight party voting means that the average time per vote cast is going to be longer. So the lines are going to be longer. So what we need to be doing is anybody who can vote by mail should, so we can build more capacity for those who can't vote by mail, and the lines won't be quite as long. I would encourage you to if you can't vote by mail, I would encourage you to vote early. And hopefully it'll keep, and maybe Cliff knows more about this, but right now we have 3 weeks of early voting. And if you go to the votetravis.com website, you can see the wait time maps. And you can see that, the wait time, at your closest polling place is an hour. But if you drive an extra 10 minutes, it might be only a half hour. And so I think that'll help. This is really important. I know people who will, including myself, who will crawl over broken glass to vote this year. And we've got to be patient. We've got to build a plan. Don't go think you're going to go vote if you only have a 30-minute window. Plan to take the afternoon off or the morning off or whatever. Bring a book, bring a lawn chair, bring a drink, whatever you need to do, but be patient. Frankly, and I don't know if I advise this, but in Travis County, the vast majority of votes are cast early. In 2008, I remember 75% of the total vote cast was cast before Election Day. My guess is that's going to be the case this time. And probably Election Day is not going to be all that busy. But none of us want to wait till Election Day. We want to get this done and in the box. But those are different options for voting. And the other thing I'd say about going in person, is because we don't have straight ticket voting, and you've got to worry about the Third Court of Appeal and the county treasurer and all those. Take the League of Women Voters Guide or any other place that you get information about the candidates and mark up your cheat sheet. And you can bring in a paper cheat sheet into the polling place. You can't bring your phone. You can't look at it on an electronic device, but bring your cheat sheet. It's going to make it go faster, and you're not going to be stuck on, God, I've heard this name, I can't remember. And mark it up before you go in. I'm going to do that, and I know most of these people, but it'll make it go faster. So those are the things that I would suggest. I want to tell one quick story that goes back to trying, how do we connect the dots? How do we get people's attention? And I think that the big thing is we got to listen. And Glenn Scott, who was a labor activist in Southeast Travis County, they were organizing. And instead of going door to door saying you need to be for this issue and that issue, they'd go door to door and ask, what's impacting you? What's causing you grief in your life? Well, we got this light, the light out, the street light that we can't get fixed. We can't get this, bump in the road fixed. Well, do you know who deals with that? No, I really don't. And they would work and organize around the issues that the community cared about. And they were building new organizers. And once they knew how to get that pothole fixed, they knew how to do other things too. And I think that listening to people is really important. And when we talk to students, what do you care about? And we try to work with them around the things that they care about. Do you know who deals with that issue? No, I don't. And have that conversation with all the issues that have been discussed. We know who deals with these issues. We know the city council has a big role. We know the legislature has a role. We know the school board has a role. And we need to help educate people about how they can address these issues going forward.
Well said. And with that, I guess that will let that kick off the rep winding down and final thoughts. If you're okay with that being your final thought, unless there was more you wanted to add, Bruce.
Oh, I'm good.
All right. And then so I guess we'll go with Brother Walker. Since you are unmuted, we'll go with you next. Any final thoughts you want to leave to people?
I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and just to wrap up, to extend Bruce's remarks just a little bit. Listening to Dr. Joseph and having a fully fleshed out, very thoughtful, very impactful agenda that you can be very passionate about is important. But to Bruce's point, for a lot of folks who are not in the community that participating, the biggest party in America for the longest time has been the I don't give a damn party. People who register, who don't vote. For a lot of folks, it's about building up a little bit of consciousness first on the path to becoming more aware of other things that they can do in their community. So starting by listening, and for anyone who is a little unsure as to whether or not it's worth participating, and especially if it's a question as to whether or not it's worth participating in the next 34 days when we pick the next president and U.S. Senator and members of Congress and a lot of local folks and folks down ballot. If there's any question about it, then think about that one thing that is important to you. Think about that one thing is important to the folks that you love. And I think it's important to remember, it's been said better by folks. It's been said better by others. Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to an alternative is one way to look at it. But another way of looking at it is that there's a lot of improvement that we need to make, but there's always a possibility that, we've learned this in the last 3 years, not to be pessimistic, but that things could get worse. If you care about the climate, if you care about, the movement for Black lives, whatever you care about, a lot of this is on the line. And we should not be, to Dr. Burnett's point, lulled into the sense of complacency that, well, this is the way things are, and whether or not I participate, it doesn't matter because this is roughly how good it's going to be. We've learned a lot over the last 3 years about how leadership does matter. And I would encourage people as they're making their vote plans to think about that issue that is important to them and hold on to that, encourage others to hold on to that while they're waiting, hopefully not too long in the lines to vote this year.
Let's hope not. Brother Cobbs, you're up next to bat.
Just one thing for people who are out there wondering if they have to register for the next 2 segments. Once you've registered for this one, you will be registered for the other 2 following segments, and you'll be getting other communication to remind you of what it is. And just people talk to each other, help each other understand what your problems are. Take your problems to the polls. Complaining and staying at home, complaining and marching doesn't do you any good. We have a voice. This is the major voice we have to make a change. Take advantage of it. If you can do that, we'll have a better place. Thank you, Giannis.
No, thank you. Dr. Burnett.
I just want to repeat to be an informed citizen, and vote for your community, not a selfish vote. Vote for things that impact the larger community. Be attentive and educate yourself on what's happening, and just recognize that there are election dates outside of the presidential election. There's the midterm, whatever term you want to call it. So there are other elections that we want to make sure that we're attentive to. And I really want to thank you gentlemen for lifting this, because Dwayne was asking a call to action. This is action, because every person that hears this should share what they heard to someone else. So doing steps like this, Giannis, allowing this to happen on your show with the great questions are a way to get our community involved in every avenue. We can leave no stone unturned in this. So I thank Bruce, my brothers of Omega Psi Phi for inviting me. And I'll see everybody on the other side of November, the middle of November.
Brother Clark, it's on you.
All right. Well, all I would just like to say is, again, thanks everyone for participating. Dr. Burnett, I appreciate your words, Mr. Elfont, and yourself as well, Mr. Walker. Thank you, immensely for this time and for all the information that you all shared. Again, I would just like to say, kind of to piggyback on Bruce Cobbs, there's that, yes, once you've registered, you should be able to access the remaining segments, which is October 4th with David Banner and October 25th with Michael Render, Killer Mike. You'll receive a series of emails to continue to remind you. But if not, you can all just email me or someone that you may know there, and we can make sure that we get that information out to everyone. And again, Giannis, you too as well, brother. Appreciate you being a platform for real, to this community that we all try to serve our best. Yes. So with that, I would like to just kind of lead us out with the video here, just real briefly, and we'll go from there. And thanks again for everyone and your time.
Awesome. Thank y'all.
90% of everything that we talk about in our music is detrimental to us. When we talk about bitches, we're not talking about women in general. We're talking about our women. Yeah. When we talk about niggas, we're talking about us. When we talking about busting somebody in the head, shooting them, we're talking about us. At what point do we take control? You can't lead the people unless you can feed the people. So we can sit down and strategize and talk about what's best and criticize what other people do, but you have to show them better.
Again, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time. That should end. That's the conclusion of this show. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.